Psychology has long sought to unravel the complexities of the human mind, but in its journey, it has sometimes ventured into eerie, controversial, and downright disturbing territory. The 20th century, in particular, saw some of the boldest and strangest experiments ever conducted in the name of science. Driven by curiosity and a desire to understand human behavior, researchers designed studies that pushed ethical boundaries and revealed the dark, unexplored aspects of human nature. From experiments that manipulated the very fabric of identity to those that tested the limits of obedience and morality, these studies offer a rare glimpse into the extremes of the human psyche. In this video, we'll delve into some of the most infamous psychological experiments, each one leaving a lasting mark on science, and posing questions that continue to echo through the world of psychology today. The Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo conducted what would become one of the most infamous studies in psychology, the Stanford Prison Experiment. Zimbardo wanted to investigate how individuals would react to being placed in positions of power and submission. He transformed the basement of Stanford University into a mock prison, assigning volunteer students to roles as either guards or prisoners with little guidance beyond role instructions. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks, but within just 6 days, it had to be terminated due to the alarming psychological effects on the participants. The guards quickly assumed aggressive and authoritarian behaviors, employing tactics to degrade and control the prisoners. The prisoners, in turn, experienced intense emotional stress, showing signs of anxiety, helplessness, and submission. As the situation escalated, Zimbardo himself became engrossed in the role of the prison superintendent, raising questions about his own bias and the experiment's objectivity. The line between role-playing and reality blurred, with participants experiencing genuine psychological distress. The rapid descent into cruelty and compliance within a simulated environment shocked both the public and the psychological community. Critics argue that the experiment lacked ethical oversight and subjected participants to unnecessary harm, leading to changes in research standards. Today, the Stanford Prison Experiment remains a powerful example of how situational factors can influence behavior, prompting ongoing debates about ethics in psychological research and the darker sides of authority. Ultimately, this study highlighted the susceptibility of ordinary people to adopt roles of dominance or submission when placed in structured environments. It forced society to question how much of our behavior is shaped by our personal values and how much is molded by the situations we find ourselves in. The Milgram Obedience Experiment. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram set out to investigate the extent to which individuals would obey authority figures, even if it meant inflicting harm on others. Inspired by the atrocities of World War II and the defense often used by war criminals, I was just following orders. Milgram designed an experiment that tested obedience under morally conflicting conditions. Participants were instructed to administer electric shocks to a learner, an actor, every time they answered a question incorrectly, with the shock levels increasing in intensity each time. Despite the learner's apparent pain and eventual silence, which implied severe injury or even death, the majority of participants continued to administer shocks at the insistence of the authority figure, who was simply a man in a lab coat urging them to continue. Remarkably, 65% of participants obeyed until the maximum shock level was reached, demonstrating a surprising level of compliance. Although the shocks were fake, the participants believed them to be real, which brought significant psychological strain to many who later expressed remorse and horror at their own actions. Milgram's findings shocked the world, revealing how authority could compel people to act against their morals. This study highlighted the power of social influence and raised disturbing questions about personal responsibility. Critics of the experiment pointed to its ethical concerns, as participants were put under extreme stress without fully understanding the situation they were entering. Today, the Milgram experiment is cited as a cautionary tale about the dangers of obedience to authority, especially when it leads individuals to commit harmful acts. Its implications extend to various fields, from the military to corporate environments, reminding us that under certain conditions, anyone might obey orders that go against their values. The Little Albert Experiment. In 1920, behaviorist John B. Watson and his assistant Rosalie Rayner conducted an experiment that would become one of the most controversial in the field of psychology, known as the Little Albert Experiment. This study aimed to demonstrate that fear could be conditioned in humans. Watson and Rayner used a 9-month-old baby named Albert as their subject, exposing him to various animals, including a white rat, while observing his reactions. Initially, Albert showed no fear of the animals, handling them without hesitation. To create a conditioned fear response, Watson and Rayner began pairing the presence of the white rat with a loud, frightening noise. Each time Albert reached for the rat, the noise would startle him, causing distress. After several repetitions, Albert began to associate the rat with the noise, reacting with fear even in its absence. This response soon generalized, causing him to feel scared around other furry objects, such as rabbits, dogs, and even a Santa Claus mask with a white beard. The experiment successfully demonstrated the concept of classical conditioning in humans, showing how emotional responses could be conditioned through repeated associations. However, the study raised significant ethical concerns, as Albert was intentionally subjected to fear without a plan to reverse the effects. The long-term consequences on Albert were never fully addressed, as he was removed from the experiment before any attempts at deconditioning could be made. Today, the Little Albert Experiment serves as an example of both the potential and the pitfalls of behaviorist research. Although it contributed to our understanding of learned behaviors and emotional conditioning, it highlighted the ethical responsibility researchers have toward their subjects, especially when working with vulnerable populations like infants. The Monster Study. In 1939, speech pathologist Wendell Johnson and his graduate student Mary Tudor conducted an experiment now infamously known as the Monster Study. This experiment aimed to investigate the impact of positive and negative reinforcement on children's speech, particularly in relation to stuttering. Johnson and Tudor selected 22 orphan children in Iowa for the study, dividing them into two groups. One group received positive reinforcement, being praised for their speech, while the other group was subjected to harsh criticism, being told they were likely to stutter or were speaking incorrectly. The negative reinforcement group, who had no prior speech problems, began showing signs of anxiety and speech issues as a result of the harsh treatment they received. Some of the children developed hesitant, anxious speech patterns, displaying classic signs of stuttering or speech avoidance. Even though these effects were temporary in some cases, for others, the speech impediments and anxiety persisted, affecting them well into adulthood. The experiment was heavily criticized for its unethical approach, as Johnson and Tudor knowingly caused psychological harm to vulnerable children without informed consent. This led to lasting effects on the children involved, and decades later, the University of Iowa issued a formal apology for the study's consequences. The Monster Study underscores the importance of ethical considerations in research, particularly with children. It serves as a reminder of the potential for psychological harm in experimental settings, emphasizing that scientific curiosity must be balanced with compassion and responsibility toward participants. The Bobo Doll Experiment. In the early 1960s, psychologist Albert Bandura conducted what is now known as the Bobo Doll Experiment, aiming to understand how observational learning, or learning by watching others, influences behavior. Bandura's study focused on the impact of modeled aggression, exploring whether children would imitate violent behavior if they observed adults acting aggressively toward an inflatable Bobo doll. The experiment became a foundational study in social learning theory, demonstrating that behavior can be learned through observation alone. During the experiment, children were divided into groups, each observing different behaviors toward the Bobo doll. In one scenario, children watched an adult physically and verbally attack the doll, while another group watched the adult interact with the doll in a non-aggressive way. A third group was given no prior observation as a control. When given access to the doll themselves, children who had observed the aggressive behavior were more likely to mimic it, showing similar aggressive actions, including hitting and shouting at the doll. Bandura's findings revealed the significant role of imitation in learning, showing that exposure to aggression increases the likelihood of similar behavior in children. The experiment highlighted the impact of media and role models on children, raising awareness about the potential influence of violent television and video games. It also spurred discussions on parental responsibility and the importance of positive role models. The Bobo doll experiment remains a pivotal study in psychology, influencing fields from education to media studies. Bandura's work opened up new understandings of how behavior is shaped not just by direct experience, but by the behaviors we observe in others, especially authority figures and role models. As we've seen, these psychological experiments push the boundaries of science, often at the expense of their participants' well-being. While they yielded groundbreaking insights into human behavior, they also highlighted the ethical challenges in psychological research. Today, each of these studies serves as a crucial lesson, reminding us that understanding the human mind is complex and sometimes fraught with moral dilemmas. Thanks to these experiments, the field of psychology has evolved, adopting stricter ethical guidelines to protect participants and ensure responsible research practices. Modern studies are now more aware of the potential consequences on individuals' mental health, recognizing that psychological well-being should never be compromised in the name of discovery. Thank you for watching. If you found these psychological insights fascinating, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have more intriguing topics lined up that explore the mysteries of the human mind and the secrets of our behavior. Stay curious and see you in the next video.